we go. All right, Joe, you want to go ahead and get started?
I do, yes, yes. Thanks, Andy, and welcome everyone back to Conversation in Transportation. I'm Joe Hummer at NCDOT. Happy to host this series, and yeah, thanks again to Andy for doing all the setup, getting us ready. We really appreciate that. Thank you also to our sponsors, the companies, Diamond and Gold sponsor companies for Nixite, who really make all of this possible. We really appreciate it. As always, type your questions into the Q&A as we go along, and we'll get those addressed as we can throughout the hour. And really appreciate you being here. So today we're talking about transportation resilience with Dr. Barbara Dow. Barbara is an extension associate professor in the biological and agricultural engineering department and extension specialist for the NCC grant at NC State University. She holds a PhD in biological and agricultural engineering and is a licensed professional engineer. She leads the Stream Restoration Project at NC State, which carries out research, trains students, conducts numerous training workshops for professionals. Barbara conducts outreach, does research, and academic programs focused on evaluating the performance of stream restoration efforts, developing new techniques for ecological restoration, and assisting communities with flooding and water quality challenges. So, Barbara, thanks so much for joining us today.
All right, thank you for having me.
We're talking about resilience today, but we're mostly talking to people like me who are traffic engineers and a lot of transportation planners as well, who really don't do resilience as part of our job. So if you wouldn't mind starting up by kind of defining that term for us.
Yes, so really resilience, and especially with the transportation sector, is the ability to rebound or spring back, right? If we have a major extreme weather event, we don't want to be knocked out, for months and months and months. We want to be able to, within a short time period, be able to have transportation flow, circulation for commerce, access, so we function as a state. So I think it's that ability to, you might not be able to resist everything, you may have damage, but everything's not shut down.
Good, good. And is this a relatively new concept in transportation?
It is. I was looking at some of the kind of like, when did people start publishing articles that were focused on this concept of transportation resilience? And I saw some other researchers from the University of Hong Kong kind of documented the literature, the peer-reviewed literature over time. And the first article was in 2006, but you saw a really exponential increase in this topic in the literature around 2012 and 2013. So it's becoming very something they've talked about and looked at across the globe, not just here in the US. And there's a lot of interest in that. And we know that kind of probably correlates with some of the weather changes we're seeing right now with climate change.
Yeah. And we really are seeing more and bigger storms in North Carolina, right?
Ask that again. I'm sorry, Joe.
We really are seeing more and bigger storms in North Carolina.
Yes, we have. hurricanes, when we had them in our state, it used to always be a big focus on wind, right? At the coast, we had a lot of wind damage, roofs blown off, things, blown away, docks, and we still have that. But things really started to transition to more rain being a bigger issue, especially with Hurricane Floyd was the first one. And because the atmosphere is warmer, we have more water vapor in the atmosphere, and so it's like a sponge. You wring that sponge out, there's a lot more water that dumps out of that sponge, and so we've seen very high levels of rain reaching 100, 500, even 1,000-year storms starting around Hurricane Floyd, and this is kind of happening in different parts of our state and being much more impactful. I mean, the wind is very damaging. We did see that, but this is a kind of a transition we're seeing with the weather.
Hurricane Floyd was 1999, right? So like
Correct.
the last 25
So,
years.
yeah, about 25 years, we've really seen that kind of a lot of more frequency of these extreme rainfall events.
And that's correlated, or maybe there's a stronger word, but at least I'll use that, with the sea level rise as well, right?
Right. We've seen as much as 11 inches of sea level rise since 1950, and about half that has occurred in the last 15 years. So that we've seen it's documented with our tide gauges, and it's increasing. So we're on that kind of, as scientists predicted, more of an exponential, not a linear increase. It's exponential, and we're kind of getting into that more rapid rate of sea level rise, and it's primarily been due to melting of the ice at our poles. So there's a lot of good information on this website called sealevelrise.org. I would encourage those of you who are interested to look at that. I think they've compiled a lot of really good information.
The idea of a 100-year storm, you mentioned already, or the 1,000-year storm, but let's stick on 100. I think I understand that, but maybe could you refresh it for me and bring us all up to date on what you really mean by that?
Yeah, and that's really a good thing to ask about, because a lot of lay people, we say 100-year storm, so they think literally every 100 years, that's the only chance I would get that storm. But you actually have, it's a statistical term where on average you have a 1% chance of that storm happening in any given year. And if we were to look at a 30-year period, you would actually have about a 26% chance of getting that storm in that time period, which happens to be the kind of typical mortgage range of a mortgage finance for a home or something. So if you put that home in a floodplain within the 100-year floodplain, you're very likely that you're going to have that storm a much higher percentage during the time that you are kind of paying for that home.
Does somebody revise the numbers on that if the storms are getting bigger and more frequent? Maybe the amount
Right.
in 100
Yeah.
years
So these
storm,
probabilities are likely that's based on historical data, and there's a lot of efforts. In fact, the DOT hydraulics unit has been kind of very much involved in helping to fund some of the work that's looking at, with changing rainfall, what are these storms looking like? What's the projections for those?
No. And I'm just curious here, is 1,000 years, is that as high as we go, or is there a 10,000-year storm?
Yeah. Well, we're definitely seeing that shift where the current 500-year storm will be more likely a 100-year storm. So the frequency of that kind of much larger event is going to be, the scale of these events and the frequency are changing.
Yeah, sure. Good. So let's talk about North Carolina's vulnerabilities. And I think we probably have many related to more frequent and more severe storms, right? Can you just tell us about a few that come to the top of mind?
Yeah, so unfortunately, we do have a lot of homes and businesses that are in floodplains. We've got a lot of infrastructure such as water, sewer, power, and as you know, transportation infrastructure it's it's located in low-lying areas in some cases, and it's been impacted by these flooding events. We've had, cars swept off the roads and roads inundated, with that water, and complete washout of even bridges and structures during these events. And some of this has resulted in loss of life. So not only like people are kind of stranded or they're trapped because they can't get out. So we've had a lot of rescues. So there's been thousands of rescues in all these kind of major storms we've had, with with Floyd and Florence and Helene. So a lot of rescue work that's gone on. That really places a burden on the emergency rescue units of local governments, county and town and city emergency services. So not only that, a lot of the flooding we've had where, the river might fill and then water goes out in the floodplain. We have also had where we have like compound flooding at the coast where we have tidal effects. And combined with that, we have what's called pluvial flooding. That's where we just have depressions or lower areas in the landscape where water tends to pool. So we've got also different mechanisms that flooding can occur across our state as well.
Yeah, good, good. Thank you to Pam Cook for putting a couple of documents up in the Q&A. Looks like a NCDOT resilience plan. And so appreciate that. That looks like a good resource. Thanks, Pam. So briefly, I'm sure we could really go into detail on all of these, but how do we start to address some of these vulnerabilities?
Well, I think, really importantly is we need to kind of try not to add new development in flood prone areas, right? And we're developing better tools to identify not just kind of riverine flooding, but some of those low lying areas with all the LIDAR data that DOT has been putting together. We've got a tremendous data set here for our state. So we can start to look at that. So in some cases, then we have this existing stuff that needs to come out, but some of it may be able to be elevated or even fortified so it can endure the flooding in some cases. So it's kind of making those decisions about what's got to come out, what's got to be elevated, what's got to be fortified. But it's really important that where we can, we recover floodplains for our rivers and streams, because the highest and best use of a floodplain is to store floodwater during these events. When you kind of combine this raging water or deep water, whatever, with people and water, generally the water is going to win. It's gonna overcome a lot of the things we have out in those areas. So that's important.
And this sounds like a long-term, long-range project, one building, one floodplain at a time.
Mhm.
Yeah, okay. So I saw your presentation at the research summit a couple of months ago and thought it was fantastic, and that's really resulted in invitation here, and thought this would be a good conversation. Appreciate your joining us. What you presented was the results of a study sponsored by NCDOT of the resilience of a highway network in Wayne County, Goldsboro area, right? So briefly tell us what the objective of the study was and what you found. Again, I thought it was superb.
Oh, thank you. I'm glad you came to this session and, followed up with this, but we really had a two-part project. The study was initiated because of the road washouts, locations where we get kind of a culvert or bridge completely washed away. We saw I think over a couple thousand places where we had washouts during the 2020 storms, during Florence and Hurricane Matthew. And so DOT gave us all the data they had on documenting those washouts, and for us to kind of look at what factors were really kind of contributing to those washouts during these events. So we did a lot of work to compile the data on those structures, their size, whether they had a head wall, and all these different factors. And we looked at delineating the areas that drained to those pipes, how big that area was, the land use, and this type of information. And we did a lot of analysis of that. We also compared the locations nearby that were okay in the same storm, didn't wash out, with those that did, to see what was the difference, to see if we couldn't identify what factors were contributing to this. And what we found from some of it, just simple analysis of the data, was that we found a lot of the washouts were happening where we had very small watersheds of less than a half square mile. Most of the washouts were happening along secondary roads. And there was clearly an undersizing issue where we had the washouts had lower pipe area, total area to watershed, or that drainage area ratio with them. We did see that when there was not a head wall present, that seemed to be a factor, as well as high, what we call headwater over diameter. So that means these higher embankments compared to kind of smaller pipes. And most of the washouts were happening where pipe sizes were less than 72 inches in diameter, and that round corrugated metal and reinforced concrete pipe were very predominantly. So it wasn't a lot of, in these particular storms. Now, Helene, we did not look at that data. That was post our analysis. So that's been a lot of really big bridges even washing out. But most of the ones we were seeing were in these smaller pipes, round, and even shorter segments of pipe. So this was very valuable because we found, where this was commonly occurring. And because it is happening, the washouts were happening in these small locations, they are in areas where we don't have the hydraulic modeling, our floodplain mapping, right? Our state has the floodplain mapping program where, shows here's the areas where we don't want to build. These are the regulatory floodplains. Here's the level the water will be in those different storms we talked about. But instead, we don't have any modeling or information data on these small pipes because they're in these small catchments. They haven't modeled for that. So we knew that we were going to have to do some type of two-dimensional hydraulic modeling to be able to really evaluate risk along a road corridor. And that was important because the second part of our project was then to, once we got done evaluating washouts, was to look at resilience. How could we identify resilient routes? And we had a lot of conversations with DOT Hydraulics Unit, North Carolina Emergency Management, the Weather Service. There was a lot of us that got together to talk about, after Hurricane Matthew, some of the storms and the impacts. And so there was this conversation, well, hey, do we just sign all the roads that say, these are the at-risk locations, say, don't go here? But what we thought was more effective was to identify these safe routes, right? These resilient routes. And instead, if we don't have them, make a road resilient, and then let's direct people to the safe corridor, right? We can close off those others, but people are going to want to get to where they've got to get to. They need that access. So let's find those resilient routes. So that was the second part of our study, say, how do we identify those? And if we don't have them, what's the best way to go about doing them? We've got, I think, what is it, almost 80,000 miles of roads in our state. So we've got a lot of vulnerabilities there, and we can't fix it all at once. So we want a process where we can do it kind of logically and also get the most bang for our buck. And so go ahead. Yeah.
To some extent, though, it sounds like a matter of we did some undersizing or under engineering it originally when the road was built or when the
right
culvert was placed.
Yes. And some of that's the nature of the type of roadway. Like if it's an interstate highway, we're designed to the 100-year storm, that's required. But some of these secondary roads and feeder roads, that criteria is much lower. Like it may only be a 10-year storm or 25-year storm. And so it's that then you get a 100 or 500-year event, it's like the capacity is exceeded, and then all those other variables start to come into play where there's no head wall, or it's short, it has a high embankment, all those factors, and then it, a perfect storm, as they say, where that is gone.
And then, if I'm hearing you, then, maybe correctly engineering or sizing on the larger highways, the more important ones, to keep some type of network functional when we get one of these big storms.
Right. And so the second part of our project, what we did is we took a study watershed called Nahunta Swamp that's about 78 square miles. And we selected this watershed because it had a USGS flow gauge that we could calibrate our model to. And my colleague, Dr. Jack Kirky Fox, developed this two-dimensional model that would give you water levels, flows, velocities through the whole watershed, not just along the larger river corridors. And so from that, we took the elevation predicted for each storm level, 25, 50, 100, 500-year storm, and compared that to the roadway elevation. So we could see if the water was projected to be overtopping the road or above it. And so we used that model, and then we got all the roadway data from DOT, right? They have all the elevation of road, all those structures along the road, and we compared all that. So every 50 foot of roadway, we would compare that elevation. And so then we did this where we would evaluate a whole road corridor along that. So we could see how many of the structures were overtopping, how much of the road was overtopping. Then we developed these costing procedures to look at, all right, if the road's overtopped, I would need to elevate it to get it up out of the water. If the structure or the bridge was overtopped, then I need a bigger culvert pipe, or I may need a new bridge that was wider and sat higher. And so we used all this DOT data on costing to come up with these planning level costs. And then we did it so we could compare. Say we had multiple routes that ran north south through our watershed. We said, well, which one's more resilient? And we could look at the different storm levels. And what we found is that going from a 100-year to a 500-year storm was much more costly. So in some watersheds, that may not be possible. If DOT said, I wanted resilience to 500-year storm, the cost would just be too much. Whereas we would see one route might be resilient all the way up to a storm level, but suddenly it had a major bridge that was not, and that it actually wasn't the best road to invest in if we wanted to go to a 500-year storm, because that bridge was so expensive that there was an adjacent route that smaller structures would be more affordable. So by having these different storm levels and comparing different routes, it's just like using your phone. Say you're going to look on Apple or Google Maps or something, or Waze, and you say, tell me how to go, and it might give you multiple routes, and it's going to give travel time, but it's considering a lot of other variables there. So we're considering water and upgrade, right, cost to that. So definitely that we thought this procedure would be this kind of approach would help DOT pick the most cost-effective ways to get between things.
That's what caught my eye when when I heard your presentation. I go, okay, yeah, now we would have a chance, have sort of a priority list, not necessarily of which ones flood first, but what's the best one to fix first to keep our network more as resilient as possible.
Right.
Yeah, that was exciting. Good. So this was 78 square miles. That's part of one county. I went to thinking about, well, gosh, let's do this statewide. Let's figure out and get this priority list of all of our 100 counties.
Yeah. Well, actually, that watershed covers portions of Wayne, Johnston, and Greene counties. It is just really a relatively small area of the state. So it's just, as I said, it was a prototype. However, DOT was, really excited about the approach we used because our state is moving to these two-dimensional models, developing those. And so we're right now looking at what it would cost to do a corridor that would include like Fayetteville down to Lumberton and cover that I-40 corridor. As you may remember, Joe, um, during Hurricane Florence, I-40 was, looked like a river. Remember some of the pictures. So it's really be good to identify some of the alternative routes and kind of compare what would it take to get I-40 to be resilient to a larger storm versus are there other routes that they could make investments that would be less, because it looks like it's going to be a big investment in that to get that have a route that we could have movement through, because that became very problematic with that road corridor shut down in that area. So we're putting together our kind of costing, and that will be the first step to really like look at a bigger segment of our state and know what it would cost.
To continue that, the I-40 case though, if I remember right, during that storm, US 17 remained open to get to Wilmington out. It's a long way around, but it was the way in and out. So, maybe the best investment is to raise 17 or enlarge the culverts there and kind of make sure that one stays open.
Yeah. And around Jones County, when they lost all the interstate, everything was flooded around there, and there was actually a road that went through some forest land that's not even fully paved or whatever. That was the road that was resilient. So
Yeah.
it's a matter of kind of looking at that. Well, maybe that road, no, we don't want to convert that road through the forest to the interstate, but some improvements there could help that be a good backup emergency road if it was too costly to fix, the other interstate roads because of the size of the structures on those. So this kind of analysis would be, like to look holistically at all roads and all waterways, and then all, even that kind of what I talked about, pluvial flooding and low-lying areas, that would really help to kind of elucidate where those places are.
And here's where maybe some of it, especially our planners among the crowd here today, come back into play, because now what we're starting to talk about is, well, what's really the most important routes for other purposes, like to get to a healthcare facility, for instance.
Right. So that's a big part of this work is you first need to identify the kind of critical nodes, like what are the locations we need to connect, excuse me. So it's communities, right? Hospitals, military bases, kind of population centers, and schools, and even places where you need to buy your medicine or where those emergency services are. You first have to kind of identify those nodes and then look at all the possible connections. And that's exactly what some of the applications do for your phone apps or whatever computer apps that come up with travel routes and estimate distances, but it's taking that type of approach and overlaying water hydraulics with it to then compare and add that variable in, because all the variables they're including there of travel times and road capacity and things of this nature are important, but if it's underwater, right, it becomes not as important.
Yep. Yeah. Good. Um, we didn't. I don't think you've mentioned dams yet either. Is that part of your? Was that part of your analysis?
Yeah, say it again.
Dams.
Dams. No, we did not look at dams, or like you're talking about earthen dams, although there were locations I know of where we had road failures or road flooding because of dam breaks. So that is something that would have to be, evaluated in some cases. I know that dam safety with the state of North Carolina has been doing a lot of work post some of Florence and Matthew because of the number of earthen dams that failed, and looking at even possible ways that these could be retrofitted with structures, drainage structures that will allow for drawdown pre a storm to be able to provide some capacity. So to prevent failure, first off, right, we don't want the failure of an earth embankment, but also maybe even to store some water to kind of mitigate or reduce some of the kind of peak flows downstream that would could potentially help with transportation as well.
Is there so far, kind of what you laid out here, it sounds to me like relatively large projects. We're talking about bigger, taller bridges, raising levels of roads, bigger culverts, larger pipes. But are there sort of smaller maintenance level activities that we could do to
Yeah, I mentioned the head wall issue. A couple things. First is one of the things we did with we created this dashboard, a data analytics dashboard to view all the results of our kind of Nahunta analysis. And one of the cool things is that you can click on the dashboard and you can say where there's overtopping above 2 feet or something.
Mm.
Well, then that would show you the really dangerous areas that this is, if it's getting overtopped by that much, that's a potential washout or loss of life, right? Sometimes it's even pedestrians try to walk through these areas with this overtopping or driving through. So that would be a way to quickly kind of focus on, here's some real high hazard areas with the goal of reducing the risk of loss of life, we could focus on those. Another thing that we talked about was that head wall issue, right? And a lot of that may be when the water comes up over the road and then goes over the downstream side. That's where it starts to erode. As the water goes from the road elevation back down into the creek, we get this kind of high energy erosive flows and it kind of eats its way. And then that's what causes that washout. So one of the things we talked about is they could go in and add head walls or on that downstream side, put some riprap rock. So if it overtops, then it's not going to completely, hopefully wash out the pipe. So I think by doing this kind of data analytics mapping strategy, you can see that. Another thing I remember I mentioned comparing the depth of water to the road at every 50 foot. And so one of the things we looked at is that if the water is only overtopping less than 1 foot and the velocity of that water is less than 2 foot per second, then that may not need the whole road to be elevated because there's water on the road, but it's a pretty low level. It's not moving fast. So it's not a big risk of someone being swept off. Now, it would still be important to have notifications that, because you can hydroplane, right? If you've got that. But if you had it the overtopping can occur, go slow, some type of warning so people know, yeah, you can drive through here, but we've got to, be careful and slow down. Then you would still have ability, for ingress, egress, whatever movement on that road. Now, on the interstates, the major roads, that would not be acceptable, right? We need to make sure we don't have standing water on those roads where, people are going to be traveling at greater speed. So that was one of the and that was a big cost savings thing we saw, is that if in these secondary roads and all, we didn't elevate everything, just focused on the kind of real high risk ones, that would be a way to save money.
Yeah, good. Reminder to everybody listening, if you've got a question for Barbara, please type that into the Q&A. Really appreciate that. We got a question in Q&A from Mike Reese, our current president of the North Carolina section. El Presidente is pointing out that the development is, in a lot of cases, still occurring in floodplains. And so are you aware of any discussion at the legislature or among the leadership to try to discourage more development in floodplain?
Right. Not at the state legislature. I would say the one thing the state legislature did do is, and some of this was part of the executive order, is that the investments for state properties would not allow for any structures within the 100-year floodplain, right? A lot of people don't realize that we allow development in the 100-year floodplain. I think people don't understand that because you have different parts of your floodway. You have the floodway, and this is no developments allowed in there because this is where the water has to move. So they view any development or restrictions there is going to prevent the flow and could potentially worsen flooding upstream because of backwater. So we have that issue but outside the floodway, as long as it's there, but they elevate it, then that is allowed. So this new rule that the state adopted said, well, for all of our state properties, and that would be like schools and DOT, all these facilities, nothing would be even in the 100-year floodplain at all. Not a matter of in it and elevated out of it. So I think that would be the right kind of move for all over the state. As you know, that's contentious, and you have to the developers, they don't, some people view that as a taking of land, and, I can't develop my land. And so there's issues with that. But at the same time that, they're not happy with that, it's cost everyone else when we have to rescue people that are in homes trapped in this water or in roads, or that people lose their life. So development in floodplains ultimately, is to me not a very smart thing to do, and something we should push hard to prevent that in the future. And we'll see with the rebuilding from Helene. Are things going to be put back in there? I know that we had maybe 1,000-year flood in parts of that, and that's not something we ever even designed for. But we might need to consider how we build and develop and where we do that, again, to make sure that we're up and out of these areas, and the things that have to be in there, they're fortified to resist the storms, are designed to withstand.
Good, good. And you reminded me of a couple of conversations I've heard over the last couple of months about NCDOT facilities that Helene exposed some of our facilities that were either prone to flooding or just not easy to get to by our employees, and so became pretty useless as well. So who thought of these things back in the day, but maybe going forward we kind of should think through that, and city and state facilities to get them better sited.
Yeah.
Good. Alf, good to hear from you, Alf. Do you have plans to conduct a study of Western North Carolina as a result of Helene? And I assume he's referring to the similar kind of analysis that you did in the Goldsboro area.
I would love to know concrete plans as of yet. As I mentioned, we are kind of focusing on the I-40, kind of Lumberton and Fayetteville and down corridor right now, kind of getting that underway. I'm hopeful we can maybe get that project going this coming year, or get that settled. Working on trying to connect with a transportation network researcher from North Carolina A&T that will add that we're water people here in our group, and so we know the hydraulic and hydrologic modeling, but we need someone that's really more of a network analysis person. And so I think we found the right person to kind of do that work and also help us with our visualization. It's really important that you not just do your study, but you have a product at the end that can really help you see the result of that and help you with decision making, right? It's one thing if you just create a map and say, here's where all the roads will flood. But then, in this 100-year storm, oh, that's great, I can visualize it, but it doesn't help me get at, all right, which one should I fix, right? So that's where we really have tried to think about what's the decisions that our state and that DOT need to make. How can I help them get to that? Being able to make those really strong choices, like this is a hard choice, but this is what makes the most sense and what's going to be what we can afford to do. Yeah.
With our very limited dollars. That's right.
Exactly. Right.
Good, good. And I want to return to it just briefly. You kind of hit the idea of educating local residents too. You're implying that you think that is worth it to some extent. There is a payoff from getting word out to people of what not to do in the event of these storms.
Yeah, I think education's, really important. We had 107 deaths with Hurricane Helene. So I think that that kind of tells us that early warning and getting information out, we've got to do better. That should not happen, right? So having our floodplains demarcated, mapped out, and then having it presented in a way, whether it's going on the news or the radio, people clearly understand, are there signs in their local community that say this is the floodway and don't get in and when these sirens or whatever the system is going off, people know to avoid that area, to evacuate, to get out. And that they don't try to drive across certain routes and roads that could sweep them away. So I think that a lot of education of people to understand the risk, but have a system so they know, right? That has happened time and again, even on the coast where people didn't realize they were in a storm surge zone. They didn't under the map. It wasn't clear to them. My house is in the zone. So there has to be a combination of kind of on the ground signage, markers, systems, education. They do get that, and that they're, kind of it's explained better and they get out because with that's just really this loss of life. I believe a lot of that's preventable. Now the damage, that will continue happening. And the signs, turn around, don't drown. I hear that more on the news too. I think that's really a good thing to be telling people, like get the message out about what's the proper behavior in to prevent this kind of being swept away and washed away.
Now, your work so far has been based in sort of um, the lower Piedmont region, what do you call Goldsboro or Lumberton, the upper coastal plain, right around the boundary there, right? And you said, like to start working in the mountains. Things will be really the calculation, I imagine, is really different up in the mountains. And then the real question is, are there sort of other regions in North Carolina where the calculation would be yet different too, where you really have to change your analysis?
Yeah, I think that I think for the same kind of process would be necessary. I think that our two-step process of that where we got all the data
Yep.
on the washouts and really evaluate it. And then you kind of use what you learn from that in the kind of developing resilient route, right? What are the kind of driving factors of these washouts and flooding? I always say that when there's a problem, I first want to understand the problem. We help communities with flooding. And so we do a lot of listening first, like what happens during the storm? What gets flooded? Where's the flooding the worst? And then we do our modeling and we look at what we see from the models to see does that really agree with what people are saying. So then once we kind of fully understand the situation that happens and what the driving forces are, then we can start saying, are there potential solutions to this? What are the best solutions? And then we model and test those. And that's just the way I like to work. And I think that's how a lot of engineers work. We're problem solvers. And so I think with those other regions, it would need the same process that we use. Let's really do a kind of forensic investigation of some of the failures that happened in the Western North Carolina from Helene. And then we can then identify the more at-risk situations and then look at it's different kind of transportation setup because of the mountains as well. But I think that some of the analysis may need to be different and what is important there may be different. I know from visiting the area that the larger rivers and the big structures were really the more great failure than on the coast where we saw these secondary roads and smaller pipes. It was because all the water converged down these mountain valleys and then it all collided into the main river segment. And it was just like this incredible volume of water. And it took all this um, structures out with it. So if you have one bridge that came out, the metal and the I-beams and everything would come through and knock the rest of the structures out. So the debris was also problematic with the storm as well. So I think you could see different things, and the analysis might need to be very different.
Good. Is this type of analysis or the, kind of broader area of transportation resilience, this is really a national or even a kind of a worldwide movement now, right?
Yeah, we have we actually did a collaboration that was done through Federal Highways, that linked up folks from the Netherlands with people from the West Coast DOTs to kind of look at what are the problems we're seeing with flooding and climate change, and then what are the approaches we're using and how can we learn and share. So that was something the Rijkswaterstaat in Netherlands that they're working on, as well as the Washington State DOT was a participant in that. And, and I've reviewed a lot of the journal papers where this is ongoing in a lot of the Asian countries. They have experienced extreme flooding from climate change, and then also in Germany and Italy, where the extreme storms that looked a lot like some of our Western North Carolina kind of events, what they're finding. And we try to stay on top of that to see what findings they have about the failures, what models they use for this, and what planning and adaption strategies are they applying. So I think that's really important that we follow this, not just, get our blinders on what our situation, but learn. And I think I really commend our DOT hydraulics unit, because they were, brought in that all that work, that collaboration they were involved in, and really valued that kind of conversations with the West, people out West, as well as from the Netherlands.
Or let's try to learn what we can as a worldwide as a profession.
Mhm.
Where's the safest place in North Carolina? Where's the safest place in the US? Where should I move if I'm scared of flooding, right?
Yeah, and I think change is occurring, so we don't really know where that is. It's ironic that parts of Western North Carolina were considered a climate refuge,
Yeah.
right? Well, then this amount of rainfall, that storm just carried, Helene had tremendous amount of rainfall, and because of the weather conditions, the way the clouds moved, it just dumped all that rain on parts, one side of the mountain range, and it just was devastating effects in that area that's going to take decades to recover from.
I read a few years ago, Northern Connecticut, the place in the US that's somehow too far north for hurricane, too far south for ice storm, then get tornadoes, etc. I guess we should all move there. I don't know. Have any advice?
Yeah, I haven't heard about the Connecticut being, all its resistance to those things. I'll have to check that out. But I know by the year 2050, we could have up to 20 inches of sea level rise, and Connecticut does have that coastline. And it's still going to be that these storms are going to carry, that water vapor as Connecticut warms along with the rest. It's going to have more water vapor in the atmosphere during these storms that we get, and they're going to have more intense flooding and rainfall. Hopefully, they don't have much development in their floodplain areas. That's the best thing that we can do wherever. I think individually across the parts of the country, we need to look at these are the best places for us to develop. And we did a kind of analysis like this for Pamlico County, where they are, they have a need for for housing, for workforce housing, and they have some industries that are coastal dependent industries that would like to move in. And so they're like, we need to know the best places for this housing and this industry. And so we did the same kind of two-dimensional modeling for the whole county and looked at sea level rise and storm surge and all these things. And we looked at the roads and how vulnerable they were to these future conditions. And we looked at all the land parcels, and we kind of were like, these are the most resilient parcels connected to the most resilient transportation corridors. So Pamlico County, if you have to develop, this is absolutely where you should go. And all the rest of this was, we identified a part of the county that was like, this needs to be managed retreat. And then the rest of this needs to be fortified or elevated. And then here's where your growth should occur. And I think that's the type of approach we should do all over the state, to say, yeah, we're going to have growth. People have to have somewhere to live and work, and we need transportation. So, but let's just do it smart. That's what I'm saying. Let's just avoid the pitfalls that we're going to continue to see, that we've seen in Matthew and Florence and Helene. Let's not go down that road of repeating these things. Let's try to get out of that.
That sounds like a superb analysis. Yeah, great. One of our stalwarts, Ed, in the Q&A asks, with regard to Western North Carolina, would designing major stream crossings for 1,000-year floods be worth at least evaluating?
Can you say that again, Joe? I'm sorry.
Yeah, that in Western North Carolina, would it be at least worth evaluating the major stream crossings at 1,000-year flood?
Well, I certainly think it would be, especially as we're looking at the kind of Atlas 14 rainfall being adjusted. I talked about that our current 500-year storm is our future 100-year storm. So I think looking at larger events, for earthen dams or for dams in general, we look at things like probable maximum precipitation, or at least a 1/3 or a half PMP is what that's called. Because we've seen historically, remember there were some just dam breaks that happened, back by the turn of the century and before, that were devastating, like whole community flooded, everybody drowned. So we know this loss of life with that. And we saw that 107 deaths in Western North Carolina. So we don't want that again. So I think we should be evaluating that, even if it's not like where everything's going to be out of there. We maybe know we can't, but in terms of that early warning, the preparedness to prevent these fatalities, we certainly need to be applying these larger storms, considering them in our designs. And I think that we won't be able to build the structures maybe to withstand them. The bridges, in some cases, I think these structures should be designed to allow overtopping of those storms. So it's closed down, like, the train is coming, you can't cross the railroad track, right? In the road. The gate goes down. So these structures are designed to allow that big storm to go over it, but then it's fortified in a way that it needs minimal kind of repair. It's almost like a flume. It's a road, but then it's a flume. And so that would be on the roads that are more, not as critical of access or secondary, but again, it's like, all right, this is closed. And then we go in, we inspect it, remove debris, and then it's back up and running, right? I think we need to look at that. That's part of that rebound that I talked about. We got to rebound. So we've got to look at a different kind of designs. And also, people talk a lot about debris, want to remove all the wood and stuff, but a lot of this wood comes with the erosion of the floodplain and the stream banks during the storm. You can't preemptively remove it.
Yeah.
And so they are looking at designs of bridges that better pass debris and wood. So that's another thing that would be in a resilience measure, rather than removing all the wood that's providing valuable fish habitat, or that's you can't remove because it's going to come with the storm itself.
Good. Well, those sound like cool ideas. I'm way out of my depth to use a pun there, but sound like cool ideas. Alf points out that I think he's referring back to your Pamlico County example, that he points out that land uses are controlled by local government, largely independent of the state. So that that kind of model would rely on intelligent local government, county and city.
Right. And collaboration among them, right? Because transportation, it's like watersheds. They don't follow boundaries of county and community, right? They overlap all of that.
Ken Putnam, who was was in Division 13 for a good long time, and then with the city of Asheville for a good long time, points out communication immediately after Helene was non-existent for several days to several weeks. So that's yet another aspect here and I don't know if your study addressed that, but also kind of where's the fiber, where's the cable
Mhm.
along which roads and which
Right.
ones.
Infrastructure, a lot of infrastructure would need to be considering these events.
Yeah, and then not just the road, although that's a really important aspect there. Sure.
Yeah.
Thanks again. Um, how often do you think we'd have to redo your analysis? And here we're presuming somehow we got all 100 counties done and we've got our nice prioritized list and we're starting to work through it, but some of these data change with time. So
Yeah, I think as the system that you develop, your kind of data analytics platform dashboard needs to be updatable, right? As you take a corridor and you get it done, then that starts to affect transportation and more of a regional way.
yeah.
And so that would need to be done. And it would need to be updatable instead of a one-time snapshot that might give you direction and you start, but it needs to have that ability to be updated. And I had another point about that and I can't remember. And it's also really important to have the best data for all your infrastructure, right? In some cases, we had missing data, like the head wall information was not in all of these data points. Also, with the storms themselves, going out and documenting the impacts during those and knowing that. And DOT has really come a long way with that because the first data we got for Hurricane Matthew was there were a lot of data points that didn't match up, where here is a reported washout, but there was no structure there, right? So we had things we had to toss them out. Whereas by the Florence data, that data was a lot cleaner and was a lot better. And so that's really important that we have the best data in terms of the information about the pipe and the structure that's there, and then after the storm. Because if you don't have good data, it's hard to analyze it to go, hey, what happened and what are those driving factors? So I think that's really important as well.
But you're kind of jumping off from a point of that generally now the data are good enough to move this analysis a good long way.
Yeah, I think we're getting there. One of the things we pointed out in our study is that some additional variables at each of these at the culverts that we had to estimate from digital elevation model or LiDAR data that get a quick measurement of that. And so that's something we had talked about with the summer interns or whatever. They could be going out and documenting some of that embankment heights, where they inverted the channel to the pipe invert. So some of the information that when we were first analyzing, it would be good to have a bit more detail than was in the pipe databases.
I'm chuckling because our summer interns just started last week and I had a conversation with one this morning, sending him out in the field to do some quick data collection. So
Yeah,
yep, right there with you. Let's take advantage. Good.
yeah. That's a good job for them to do. Go really document our stuff.
Barbara, we just got like 1 or 2 minutes left. Anything that we missed? Anything, you want to leave us with a couple of parting thoughts here?
No, I think that we've covered a lot of ground and I really appreciate, I'm very passionate about this, trying to be more resilient. I grew up in North Carolina and I got all my degrees here at NC State. And so I just look forward to a time when we have one of these major storms and they say show the flooding, and then they show North Carolina just rebounded like this, that we are doing things smart. And I really commend DOT because I think they want that too. And they're within the hydraulics unit I've seen, they really want to progress. There's not like a defensiveness, like this is the way we've always done it, or this. They're really like, how can we advance and progress and do things different? So I think DOT has the right attitude to move forward. We know it's expensive, it's going to be difficult, but I really commend that attitude. That's what we need.
Good, good. I appreciate that. I see it on my side of DOT as well. Glad to hear it there. And that's really what caught my attention with your presentation a few months ago was you know, if we do this, we can come out of this with a prioritized list of,
Mhm.
you know, where to best spend the next dollar that makes the most sense.
Right.
That's so attractive. So,
Mm.
Barbara, thanks so much. Really appreciate it. I learned a lot. Hopefully, folks listening, did as well, and, continued, success with your work. Go get them. Give us that list.
All right, great. I want to so bad. So I
Awesome.
really do. Thank you so much, Joe. I appreciate you asking me to participate in this. And thank you everyone that online, and feel free to email me with any kind of follow-up thoughts. I appreciate you dialing in.
Very good. I do too. Yep. Okay, and we will be back in June. I think Andy can correct me if I'm wrong, June 24th.
That's what
Our
I have
next
down. Yep.
conversation, and it'll be on back on safety, which somehow we haven't solved that problem yet either. So we're going to bring in an expert and have a conversation on safety June 24th at noon, unless things change drastically between now and then. I think I'm done here. Andy, going to turn it back to you, but thanks all around.
Yeah, thanks, Joe. Again, just the usual reminder, you should get the PDH and evaluation forms this afternoon or tomorrow morning. If you don't receive those, you can email operations@nixite.org. Again, thanks everybody for being here.
Very good. Take care, y'all.
Thank you.